Your new house is on fire. Are you okay? Maybe you should call the fire department right away. I rushed to my home as soon as I got the call from my mother-in-law. I didn't want to believe it, but my house was on fire. Why on earth? Panicking, I called my mother-in-law again. Robert is sleeping in the room. Please call 911 right away. What? She was taken aback, not expecting my husband to be asleep inside. When I asked my mother-in-law about the fire, her response was totally unexpected. I got married 2 years ago and had our son, Jason, this year. Following his birth, we bought our dream home. Catherine, we finally got our dream home. I'm gonna work even harder now. That's Robert, my husband, always making me smile. We've got a hefty mortgage, so make sure you work hard. We joked and laughed together. Even after marriage and having a child, our bond remained strong and we shared jokes often. However, building a good relationship with my mother-in-law hasn't been easy. My mother-in-law has quite an animosity towards me. It's been like this ever since I first went to greet my in-laws after our engagement. Hello, I'm Catherine. I was nervous while introducing myself to my in-laws for the first time. Don't be so formal. Please take care of our Robert. It was my father-in-law who eased my tension. My father-in-law's a tall, broad-shouldered man but incredibly gentle and kind. You're the young lady who's here to steal our Robert away. My mother-in-law's words felt straight out of a soap opera. Mom. That's no way to speak. My husband defended me, pointing out his mother's behavior. What did you say, Robert? You're the son I raised with so much care, and she's trying to steal you. Just a remark from my husband set her off like this. I was genuinely shocked to see her react in such a way. I had heard from my husband that she was a bit too affectionate towards him, but I never expected it to be this intense. By the way, did you say Catherine? What do your parents do? My father passed away when I was little, and my mother works as a nurse. I followed in her footsteps and work as a nurse as well. So, you were raised by a single parent. I can't trust Robert to someone who probably didn't receive enough love. That's incredibly rude to say, especially upon our first meeting. Sure, I was raised by a single mother, but I believe I was brought up with all the love I needed. If she keeps belittling my mother like this, I might as well leave. Just as I had that thought, my husband stood up. Enough is enough. No matter what you say, Mom, I'm gonna marry Catherine. If you're against our marriage, so be it. But if you try to interfere with our plans any further, I'll cut ties with you. Robert, why would you say something like that? You're abandoning me. Catherine, let's go. My husband and I left, leaving behind my dramatically crying mother-in-law, and after saying our goodbyes to my father-in-law, we departed from their home. I'll get Robert back. Just as we were about to step out of their front door, I had a feeling that my mother-in-law said something. Feeling scared, I decided to just ignore it. It seemed like what my husband told my mother-in-law really hit home because she stayed quiet and didn't interfere with our wedding plans thereafter. 6 months into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant and we visited my in-laws to share the news. My father-in-law was thrilled, but my mother-in-law started with her sarcastic remarks again. It's hard to believe someone raised by a single parent is having a child. Do you even know how to love properly? My mother-in-law still assumes that since I was raised by a single parent, I must not have received enough love. If I hadn't been loved, I would have gone off the rails a long time ago. I was tempted to tell her just that, but held my tongue. Since you're pregnant, Catherine, what did you do about your nursing job? Did you quit? No, I didn't quit. I'm on maternity leave. You're not gonna dump all the housework on Robert, are you? I'm not gonna dump everything on him. Robert said he'd help out, so we're planning on sharing the chores. See? You're gonna make Robert do everything. It's sad he'll have to come home tired from work and then be expected to do household chores. At my mother-in-law's comment, my husband was so taken aback that he was rendered speechless. Hey, just let it be. Both Catherine and Robert seem uncomfortable. My mother-in-law looked like she wanted to say more, but my father-in-law's words finally silenced her. When the baby is born, please bring him over. My father-in-law said with a gentle smile. Of course. I'm looking forward to bringing them over. 8 months later, with my husband's support, I was able to safely give birth to our son, Jason. A year after that, we decided to buy our own home, even though it might have seemed a bit early. We figured if we're gonna take out a mortgage, might as well start repaying it sooner rather than later. To celebrate our new home and my son's first birthday, we invited my in-laws over for a modest dinner. Wow! What a lovely house! Congrats on the new home! And happy first birthday, Jason! My father-in-law praised our home and acknowledged Jason. However, my mother-in-law seemed displeased and didn't say anything as she entered our home. Thank you for coming over today. Really now? Why do we have to come all the way here for you and my grandchild? The only good thing is getting to see Robert. While my mother-in-law grumbled, she took a seat on the living room couch. Mom, please, don't say things like that. Let's just enjoy the meal. With my husband's calming words, the dinner began. For a while, we had a pleasant time. Suddenly, my son started to cry, and the room became noisy. What's the matter, little guy? Hungry? I rushed over to my son, trying to soothe him. But he wouldn't stop crying. Stop that incessant crying. Quiet him down. My mother-in-law shouted out of the blue. Enough already. Is he crying because he lacks your love? Can't even calm down your own son. No wonder I didn't want Robert to marry you. She continued to belittle me for being a single parent. I was at my wit's end and snapped back at my mother-in-law. It's not about love. Babies cry because that's their way of communicating. And what's your problem with him crying? If you can't stand it, just leave. If you're gonna be like that, I will leave. I've seen Robert, and that's enough. Robert, if you stay with this worthless woman, you'll end up worthless too. You can always come home. My mother-in-law, in a huff, took my father-in-law and left. It's crazy to even yell at our son like that. I felt relieved when she left. Sorry about today. My mom was really out of line. To be honest, I never thought she'd yell at her grandson. It might sound harsh, but maybe we shouldn't see my folks for a while? It seemed my husband felt the same way I did. To be honest, I was thinking about telling him that I wanted to distance ourselves from them for a while. Yeah, let's take a break from them for a bit. We talked it out, and both being exhausted, we decided to call it a night. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. Hello? I'm truly sorry about the other day. I shouldn't have yelled at Jason. How about coming over to my place as a peace offering? I've prepared dinner. My husband won't be there, but please stay a while. My mother-in-law sounded much kinder than usual. I found this new side of her a bit unsettling, but I felt it would be rude to refuse, so I decided to head over to my in-laws' house. All right. I'll bring Jason along. After about a 30-minute drive, I arrived at my in-laws' house and rang the doorbell. But no one answered. Is my mother-in-law not home? Just then, my phone rang again. It was her. Hello? I'm at your house, where are you? Your new house is on fire. Maybe you should call the fire department? After telling me that, she hung up. My house is on fire? What on earth is going on? Before I could process this, she sent a picture to my phone. There was no mistaking it, that was my house. Frantically, I tried calling her back. But she wouldn't answer. Oh no. Robert is still at home. I kept trying to get a hold of her. As time ticked by, 10 minutes had already passed. If that photo was real, my husband could be in danger. My husband had left for work in the morning, but had come home early due to feeling ill. He was resting in our bedroom upstairs. Just as I thought about ignoring my mother-in-law and heading home, I got a call back from my mother-in-law. Hello? Why are you calling repeatedly? What's going on? Is it true that my house is on fire? That's what I told you, didn't I? I even sent you a picture, right? My mother-in-law. Where are you now? Call 911 immediately. Don't be so alarmed. I'm sure the neighbors have already reported it. How can she be so nonchalant about this? Even if it's your son's house burning. Normally, my husband would be at work at this hour. But my mother-in-law probably didn't know he'd come home early because he felt sick. I was furious at my mother-in-law's apparent lack of intent to call the fire department. If we leave it like this, my husband might get caught in the fire and never come back. My mother-in-law, listen to me. Robert is sleeping in our burning house right now. If we don't do something, Robert might die. I still couldn't believe there was a fire, but I tried to explain it calmly to her. What? Are you kidding? Why is Robert in the house? Why? Robert! Robert! As soon as I told her that my husband was sleeping inside the blazing house, my mother-in-law started to panic. She seemed really shaken, unable to converse properly and looking utterly lost. Please, calm down. Okay? Call the firefighters first. I'm gonna head there right away. If you're still near our place, go from house to house and ask the neighbors to evacuate. I told my mother-in-law to prioritize saving lives. Working as a nurse, I've seen many people brought in for emergencies. Most of those brought in from fires are too late, their lungs scorched and unable to breathe. Once it gets to that point, it's too late. Some people might have noticed our house is on fire, but others might not have. Yet, she was panicking, unsure of what to do, asking me for guidance. That's why I'm saying I'm gonna head home now, so prioritize saving lives. I must have been agitated as well. Usually, no matter what she'd say, I'd never talk back so forcefully. But now, if I didn't get her to act, my husband could die. It's okay even if the house is totally burned down. But, if my husband were to die, he'd never come back. With that thought in mind, I yelled at my panicking mother-in-law over the phone and hung up on her. I can't say I don't understand her feelings, thinking her own son might die and being so distraught she can't act. I doubt I'd be any more composed if I were in her shoes. But panicking forever won't save Robert. My husband's okay, right? But what if something happened? Overwhelmed with anxiety and fear, I hurriedly drove to our house. After about a 30-minute drive, I finally reached our place from my in-laws' house. Our home was completely engulfed in roaring flames, leaving hardly any trace behind. Please, make way! Excuse me! Move, please! Amidst all this, I could hear paramedics carrying someone on a stretcher. It must be my husband. Thinking that, I approached the paramedics. He might have been burned beyond recognition. Excuse me. I live here. Is the person you're carrying from this house? When I asked with a trembling voice, they let me see the person on the stretcher. My worst fears were confirmed. It was my husband being carried out. Robert! Robert! Answer me! My husband, lying on the stretcher, had burns all over his body, and it was impossible to tell if he was alive or not. I wanted to accompany my husband in the ambulance, but I was told that I needed to be present for the scene investigation, so I couldn't. My mother-in-law was questioned as the first one to discover the fire. After about an hour of investigation at the scene, I was finally let go and immediately headed to the hospital with our son. At the reception, I was told he was in a private room. Without delay, I went straight there. Robert! This can't be real! Entering the room, I whispered to myself. My husband was wrapped in bandages from head to toe, lying completely still. My husband's gone. I couldn't help but break down, clinging to him. Why did this happen? Robert! Answer me! It hurts. Please let go. Don't just assume I'm dead. Even though his voice was weak, my husband spoke those words. I had thought my husband was gone for good, but he was alive. In my overwhelming joy, I hugged him tighter than I should have. I really thought you were gone. I'm so glad you're alive. My husband's doctor said that while the burns were severe, his life was not in immediate danger. With some time in the hospital and treatment, he'd be able to return to everyday life. However, I was also told that the particularly severe burns on his left side might leave some lasting effects. My husband probably didn't want to believe that there might be lingering effects. But for me, just knowing that he was alive was a blessing. Just the thought of possibly losing my husband was too much for me to bear. That night, I was allowed to stay in my husband's hospital room. The next day, I couldn't help but think about the phone call from my mother-in-law the day before about the fire. Normally, if her son's house was on fire, she'd call 911 before letting me know. Moreover, when I went to her house after being called by her, she was nowhere to be found, and she was the one who reported our house fire. I didn't want to consider the possibility, but thinking this, I headed to her house after giving her a call. My father-in-law and mother-in-law welcomed me in, and we began to discuss the events of the previous day. "How's Robert doing?" "Well, the burns are bad, but his life isn't in danger. However, there might be some lasting effects." When I said this, my mother-in-law covered her face with her hands. I couldn't read her expression, but she was clearly shaken. Feeling suspicious, I discreetly turned on my cell phone's voice recorder. "I'm gonna ask you straight up. I came to this house yesterday after you called me. But there was no sign of you or your car, and there was no response when I rang the doorbell. You told me about the fire at our house, right? How did you know about the fire at our house, which is a 30-minute drive from here?" "It was just a coincidence. I thought I'd pick you guys up and was heading your way. But I told you on the phone I was coming over, right? Why didn't you tell me then that you were coming to pick us up?" I thought of it after hanging up the phone. Things like that happen, don't they? "I see. But why didn't you call 911 before telling me? Normally, if your son's house is on fire, you'd call 911 right away. But you didn't do anything until I told you Robert was asleep inside. You didn't set the fire, did you?" I had always had a suspicion that my mother-in-law might have been responsible for the fire. Honestly, I wanted her to firmly deny it. But after I asked, my mother-in-law went silent. "Hey, Catherine's asking you something. How about giving her an answer?" My father-in-law urged his silent and frozen mother-in-law to reply. "It's not your fault." Until now, my mother-in-law, who had been silent, began to speak slowly. "Catherine, because you're taking Robert away from me. I thought if the house burned down, your relationship would sour and he'd come back to me. But I never imagined Robert would be asleep." I wanted to deny it. But my hopes were quickly shattered. So, my mother-in-law was the arsonist after all. "I can't believe you actually started the fire, my mother-in-law. I've recorded what you just said on a voice recorder. I'm taking this to the police." I showed my mother-in-law my phone displaying the voice recording app, asserting my intention to report her. "To be honest, I'm relieved my husband's alive. But what were you gonna do if he had burned alive? You would have killed your beloved son." "I'm sorry." The moment my mother-in-law apologized in a weak voice. "You've gotta be kidding me. You idiot. What have you done?" Usually a gentle father-in-law, he looked like he was possessed as he slapped her hard. "You caused trouble for others and even try to kill your own son. I was a fool to marry someone like you. I don't ever want to see your face again. We're getting divorced today." "What? No, please." The sudden divorce declaration from my father-in-law left my mother-in-law in shock. She had no words to say and just looked down. "You're not saying anything, so I take it you agree with the divorce? Then get the hell out now." "I'm sorry. I truly am. I regret it. Please, don't divorce me. Don't abandon me." My mother-in-law begged my father-in-law, crying. "Don't abandon you? You think I'm nice enough to live with someone like you? You almost burned down someone else's house along with your own son." Pushing aside the pleading mother-in-law, my father-in-law continued yelling. My father-in-law was absolutely right. "Mother-in-law, considering what you've done, it's no wonder father-in-law wants to divorce you. You might be facing many years, perhaps decades in prison." Those words silenced my mother-in-law completely. Perhaps she hadn't realized the gravity of her actions and that she could be sentenced to prison. Collapsing to her knees, my mother-in-law hung her head, looking completely drained and lacking the usual energy to make snide comments. "I'll be on my way now. Take care in prison. After leaving my in-laws' house, I headed straight to the police station and submitted the voice recording as evidence. That recording became the definitive evidence, and my mother-in-law was arrested without delay that very day. After all the times she berated me, saying a child from a single-parent home lacks love, who's the one lacking love now? Burning down the brand new house her son had worked so hard to buy. Moreover, she almost killed her beloved son with her own hands. There's no reason for someone like you, who could casually set fire to her son's house, to talk to me about love. Reflect on your actions for the rest of your life in prison. Looking at our burnt-down house, that's what I thought. Having lost our home, while my husband was hospitalized, we stayed with my parents' house. It's been a long time since I've been at my parents' house. We've decided to rent an apartment when my husband gets discharged, so for now, I'll just lean on my mother. A month later, my mother-in-law was charged with arson and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Because she got a life sentence, we weren't gonna get any compensation or medical expenses for my husband, but for me, never having to see her again was a bigger relief. Thankfully, my husband was recovering, and he didn't have any lasting injuries. The burn scars are still raw, but the doctor said they'd heal over time. Then, a week later, my husband got discharged. Hey, can we stop by my folks' place before heading to the new apartment? My husband asked, and so we decided to visit my in-laws' house before moving into our new place. Catherine, Robert. I'm truly sorry. As soon as we entered the house, my father-in-law apologized immediately. I've divorced my wife. She'll pay for her sins in prison on her own. I already told Robert over the phone. Saying that, he handed me a sizable bag. It's a new place, and you probably had a mortgage. I'm not sure if the insurance will cover the fire since my ex-wife was responsible. It might not be much, but please accept this. When I looked inside the bag, there was about $300,000. I can't accept this much. I was floored by the amount, but I refused to accept it. Please, won't you take it? I feel it's still not enough. She did it, but as her husband, I feel responsible too. Please. I didn't up for it, but I gave in to my father-in-law's pleas and accepted it. All right, Dad. See ya. As Robert and I were about to leave, his father stopped us. Catherine, I know it might bring back memories, but could you bring Jason and visit once in a while? It might be selfish of me to ask this. Of course, we'll visit. It's not selfish at all. Please spend time with Jason. I replied, and my father-in-law looked apologetically with tears. Our dream home was destroyed because of my mother-in-law, but we decided to start fresh and work hard as a family. Hoping that one day, we'd have our dream home again with everyone.